For every single one of the access points, and I'll show you a graphic that will help you understand it, we built out performance task requirements and performance tasks. So again, we wanted to move away from this idea of teachers have to sort this out or make something up to we want to really clearly measure knowledge and skills, and here's how you do it. It's set up for you. So that's going to be a huge shift, and it's going to really allow us to figure out what does Leslie know and what can she do at different points versus like how as a teacher am I kind of cobbling this together. So every performance task is set up for you with requirements. Everyone has interchangeable items, and each one has the same structure. So they have requirements, examples, adaptations, and restrictions. I'll show you what that means because I will walk you through it. So one of the things that's important is that I want to call it split the difference between giving our kids a fixed item test where children's population, an item would pop up and either you can do it or you can't do it, and having something that is teacher constructed. So I'll show you what that looks like. It is difficult to see, and that's okay. If you can just see that there's a square associated with each square, then you're doing great. So, third grade literature. The most complex task is right here, and it is associated, it is set up to measure the more complex access point. If you're at the intermediate level with your student, you'll have an intermediate space that's set up for you. And at the less complex level, you have it set up too. All the documents are public. They're posted right now. They're all there for you. It is not a secure item test. You have a very clear idea of what's going on. They're all published to our website. Okay. So again, performance tests, they're set up to measure the skills that are called out for you. So we call out some skills, and then we're going to measure them. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to show you this graphic. This graphic is embedded for you on your page 11. What I did is I pulled out from you the exact text that will appear in the educator's guide. It's pretty robust. I'm certainly not going to read it to you. This graphic is here. I'm going to talk you through this example, and I think this example will really help you understand what's going on and where we're headed. It will also be my Mr. Wizard demonstration, so that will be exciting. So this is third grade measurement and data. For something brand new, math is the easiest thing to do. It's really concrete. So that's where we'll start with a new concept. More complex, setup, intermediate setup, less complex setup. So I'm going to show you what this looks like in a slightly larger detail. You don't have this, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read this through with you so you can see. And it's okay that you don't have it. It's actually posted if you want to. If you go to page 12, you can see the breakdown of the intermediate level. And then I'll show you a slide of what that looks like, but if you want to peek at it while I talk through it, you can do that. So if I come over here, I look at the more complex task. Okay. This basically is where we start utilizing something, right? Right here, can I utilize the concept? So this is asking me to actually ask the child to do some measuring, right? So can I utilize it? So what I want to do is I'm going to assess the student's ability to measure. So if I take a look here, the access point here is the student will measure the length of a given object. So the requirements here are all set up. The example is set up. Teacher directions are set up. So it says very clearly, although it's a little blurry here, here's a crayon and a ruler. And it literally says, you don't need this direction probably, but it says, place the crayon next to the ruler. So if I was to do such a thing, I don't have a crayon, I have a marker. And I wanted a student in the more complex level to actually measure. I have a measuring instrument here, I have a ruler, I have a marker, and I could set it up and I could say, Leslie, can you please tell me how long this is? Can you measure this? So that's utilizing the concept. The other way I could do this, if this is a pretty initial thing, but we still know we can be actually utilizing it, the second example shows me how to do this very clearly. They use the example of an index card. So why can you switch it out? What if your student doesn't have manual dexterity, has lower vision, this isn't appropriate? You'll use something else. So here is a high contrast manipulative. and I lined it up for the student. It tells you exactly what to do here. I can give the student answer options. So this happens to be 2 inches. Leslie, how long is this? Is it 2 inches, 5 inches, or 10 inches? Okay. So I can start asking questions that way because I do want to be interacting with measuring things, but we're not quite at the point where the student can actually generate the answer. So if this is the way to go, it's set up for you here. If I realize that we're actually in the center area, which is student will identify tools used to measure length, it's set up there for me, and it says, I have a beaker, not a measuring cup, because this is what I use to measure stuff. So, Leslie, I want to know how long this is. Would I use a measuring cup? Would I use a liquid measure or a beaker? Would I use a ruler? Okay. So I'm working at this middle level here. It's set up for me. I have the directions. It's a piece here. We use a clock in this example and a liquid measure, but you can switch them out. And at the most initial level, as a student will identify the longer of 2 objects. So Leslie, which is longer? Okay. So I have 3 different really clear levels that a student can be working on. If a student has low vision, if we're doing a lot of touch, no matter what it is, you can switch up, can I touch objects and start to understand that something is longer than the other? Sure. Do I necessarily have to use the words length to start out with? No. I used to always make sure that I want to say drop the academic vocabulary and that I would use the word length. I might not have my student using it, especially if my student wasn't verbal, but I always felt it was important to always at least once kind of say drop the language. So as you can see, here's the actual setup. You have the same graphic, and it's really clear. I will talk you through quite a few examples where we pull out these different pieces, but at the moment, you can see that very top is the access point. That's the standard, if you will, we're measuring. The very, very top, I'm sorry, if you call out, is the organizing structure of the Common Core. So it's the domain if it's math, the strand if it's English language arts, or if we happen to be in science, it's the ELR or performance expectation. The requirements are all there. Okay. So requirements might be there are 5 unique items, and I will tell you and show you exactly what that means, I promise. One of the items has to be used to measure length. Okay. And they might be directions. Distractors must be measurement tools. For this middle one, we don't want to use a piece of broccoli as a distractor. That doesn't help. We need to understand what is the appropriate tool for length. Okay. Adaptations, how am I going to make this work? If I had picture cards, could I use that? Sure. A lot of our kids are working on iPads, are working on computer programs, have other assistive tech. Could you use that? Sure. Okay. Adaptations are about accessibility and making things work. Restrictions there aren't any. Restrictions are really specific. They might be something like if the student, if they're measuring if a student can count, don't count the objects. Okay, it's what's called violating the construct being measured. If I want to know if you can tell time, I can't move the hands around the clock and tell the time for you. Okay. There are very few, and they're up there to call them out is because when we teach, we do that naturally, but for this purpose, we can't. So again, I'm going to call this out to you. I just did this with you, but you can really see the clear association here. So it is circle. More complex, I'm going to do the measuring. It's up there. My example very clearly is, and it's set out for you. You may or may not want the script. It might help you to start out with, but you're not charged with figuring it out. It's there for you. So here's an index card, and then in paren it actually tells you, put the index card on the work surface. You probably don't need that, but it's there. Here's a ruler, place a 12-inch ruler so that it's in line with the edge of the index card, and then I stop there. But so you can see it's really well called out as to where you're going. Okay. And what I put up here, these are the definitions that have to do specifically with our assessment. So this is our language, and this is the language that we'll continue to talk about and work through. The first one is really organizing structure of our standards being Common Core standards, and then Washington Science standards. So domains, strands, ELRs are just, those are the grade level standards and organizing structures. Access points, those are kind of our alternate standards. So what's what we're measuring? Requirement is what's necessary. For example, at least 2 items or circles. Examples are detailed examples. So for example, setting up 2 sets of rows, one has 3 pennies and 2 pennies. One should have 5 pennies. If pennies are a bad idea, I've used pennies once, it was a bad idea. Don't use them. I also used marshmallows once. We ate the manipulatives. It was a bad idea. So figure out what works best. Adaptations are how we create additional items, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. How we make a task more accessible, and how we change the engagement activity. So one person said, do I have to just stop into this, in isolation altogether? Or what if we're working on something and doing it? I said, that's the most important part, is how are we engaging? Are we doing something that has to do with cooking or measuring? That would be honestly the most appropriate. And restrictions are adaptations we can't make because they violate what we're measuring. For example, like counting the items.